Hello. We're looking at the subject of the Beatitudes here. We are looking particularly at the third Beatitude, Matthew 5:5. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, all of these Beatitudes are in the same basic form, and as I like to describe it, they have four parts to them. In the first part is this word, blessed. Each one of them begins with this word. This word is makagrizo. It actually means happy or most happy. If Jesus had intended blessed, like we typically understand it in the English, he would have used a word more similar to the word eulogy. But this word simply means happy. And it has the prefix mak on the front of it, such as similar to English macro, which means most happy or macro happy. And so, most happy are those who, skip down there, most happy are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So the first part is this word, blessed, or most happy as I like to call it. The second part of this is the condition that we find ourselves in, the qualification for the phrase. The meek. The meek are most happy. Now, all of these conditions are not things to be pursued. We do not necessarily pursue all of these, such as down here, when we look at Matthew 5:10, we never pursue persecution. Furthermore, when we're up here in Matthew 5:3, some people might disagree, but in general, we're not pursuing poverty in spirit or being poor in spirit. Some of these you could say that we might seek, like purity in heart. But the point is these are not necessarily things that we're trying to cultivate. The thing we're actually looking for, the thing that we're actually wanting, is this first part here, blessed. And so we have, the first part is blessed, or most happy. The second part is the condition we find ourselves in when this should be true. And the third part, as I like to put it, is simply this word right here, for, or because. This establishes the condition in which it's true. And then this last part is the fourth part, the reason. So we have most happy, the condition, because, and the reason. And these all follow this simple construct. And this is, sorry, I'm jumping around here a little bit. This is not a very complicated sentence structure. It simply means that when you find yourself meek, you are most happy because you shall inherit the earth. It is the reason here, number 4, coupled with the because, number 3 or 4 here, that causes the blessed or most happy, number 1, in the state of the condition in number 2, meekness. There's nothing necessarily wonderful or inherently blessed in the condition here, number 2, meekness. There's nothing inherently blessed about meekness. What's being said here is it all hinges on number 3 here, this word for, or because. The reason, number 2, is blessed, number 1, is number 3, because, and then the reason. Let's look at this another simple way. What Jesus is saying here is that of all these conditions, some of them might be positive and some of them are definitely negative, things that we don't seek. We don't seek persecution. But when we find ourselves in these conditions, or when someone is in those conditions, it is the reason here, the promise, that when one realizes it, they become most happy. And so what in Matthew 5:5 here, he's saying, most happy are the meek. Those who are meek, because they will inherit the earth, they're most happy. If you find yourself in a place of not fighting to get your way, not trying to get ahead, not any of these things, when you realize that the things that everyone else fights for in this life will be given to you, number 1 is automatic. And that's exactly what this says. Now, I want to demonstrate these things. Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 13. He says he was revealing the secrets hidden from the foundation of the world. And that's exactly what he's doing here. So all these things are principles that are found elsewhere in God's Word. All throughout the Old Testament, these were the same principles that were at work. And these are the principles of God's kingdom. This is how God's kingdom works. When we realize that, what Jesus is doing is teaching us how the kingdom has worked in the past, worked in his day, and continues to work in our day and in the future. And so right here, this is 1 Samuel chapter 1, and we are looking down at the birth of Samuel. Hannah was one of two wives of her husband, and the other wife was giving her a hard time because she didn't have any children. Hannah didn't have any children. Now this greatly distressed Hannah, of course, and when she had the chance, she went to the temple, and it says she was sitting on a seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord, and she was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she made a vow, saying that if the Lord gave her a son, that he would be a Nazirite, and that she would dedicate him to the Lord all the days of his life. Sorry, changing the size there a second. She would dedicate him all the days of his life. And the interesting thing about her story is what we find here in the next couple of verses, beginning at verse 12. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved and her voice was not heard. Now, when Eli saw this, he thought that she was drunk, and he rebuked her. But when she found out that she was greatly distressed and she was praying, Eli, through the word of the Lord, promised her a son. Now, this is a wonderful picture of meekness. Hannah didn't even let words come to her mouth. She didn't let speech come to her lips. She was so distressed, and yet she simply has a legitimate cry to the Lord. She wants a child. That is simply the thing that's most precious and dear to her heart. And so she's there. She's not railing on anyone. She's not doing anything. In fact, she doesn't even give words, give speech to her prayers. And so Hannah, there in her meekness, on top of that, then gets rebuked by the priest, and she doesn't respond angrily, but she simply says that she's troubled in her spirit. And then, as we look over into just a couple of chapters later, this is 1 Samuel chapter 3, down in verse 19. God has given her Samuel. Eli promised it by the word of the Lord, and it has come to pass. And then as we read about Samuel the prophet, it says, And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. So we have Hannah, this picture of meekness in the temple, who is not even allowing speech to come to her lips and to her tongue. And in that picture of meekness, God granted her the desires of her heart. She gave her the things of the earth. She inherited the earth and inherited a son who, it says, the Lord let none of his words fall to the ground. So in the place of her meekness, where she didn't even allow words to come to her lips, she inherited the things of the earth through a son whose words never fell to the ground. The basic construction of all of these things works exactly like that. We find ourselves in many conditions where we're meek. We might see other people getting success or other people getting ahead. The condition of meekness on its surface, not being assertive, not trying to force and get your way. The condition of meekness is almost the antithesis of pride. It is not standing up for oneself. And yet when Hannah brought her request to the Lord, she was given a son she was given the things of the earth, a son, the desire of her heart, that was probably one of the greatest prophets outside of Moses and Christ that the Bible records. It says that none of his words fell to the ground, which it doesn't say about the words of any other prophet. And so we see Hannah, in her meekness, inherits the things of the earth. Now, another good example of this is found in the life of David. If you know the story, this is the story of Shimei cursing David. This is found in 2 Samuel chapter 16. And it says here, well, first of all, the background, David is running for his life. His son Absalom has taken the kingdom from him, and David is fleeing with his court and with many of his men, and they're fleeing from the temple, and they're going into exile. And it says, when David came to a certain place, there came a man from the house of Saul whose name was Shimei. And as he came, he cursed continually. Not only that, we see in the next verse here, he threw stones at David. So he was throwing rocks at David. And then adding to the cursing, as he cursed, he said, he railed on him with railing accusation, calling him a man of blood, saying the Lord is avenging on him the blood of Saul. He was accusing Saul of the bloodshed and the murder of Saul's house, of taking the kingdom at the blood of Saul. And one of David's men says, you're the king. Just let me go and take off his head. Let me go kill this guy who's just cursing you. You're at your lowest point. Let me go kill him. But David said, what do I have to do with you? He didn't want anything to do with someone who had that attitude. He says, if he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, curse David, then who shall say, why have you done so? And David said to Abishai and all the servants, behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more may this Benjaminite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. But then verse 12 reveals a deeper side of what's going on. David realizes that everything will be repaid. And he says, it may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, that the Lord will look at what this fellow is doing, all this undeserved cursing, and that the Lord will repay me good for his cursing today. He realizes that nothing is done in this world that God overlooks. He knows that God may look on what Shimei is doing, and if he doesn't avenge himself, that there's a good likelihood that God will do good to him. Now, it's interesting, as Chuck Missler points out, if one looks at the book of Esther, we see that Mordecai was the son of Shimei. Now, there's no way to know for sure whether this is the same Shimei, but it could very well be that David's choice to not kill him resulted in Mordecai being what he was and where he was, and maybe existing at all, so that Mordecai could encourage Esther to go to speak to the king and to save Israel. That's just an interesting possibility. But as we look at the story of David, however, in terms of inheriting the earth, David had an understanding that the inheritance of the earth was in this life. For his whole life, he had a couple of people that he didn't kill. Let me skip back right to where we were. Here we are. And so here he is at the end of his life in 1 Kings chapter 2. And he's speaking to his son Solomon. And as he's speaking to Solomon, I should fix that. He says in verse 5, moreover, you also know what Joab did to me. He says, you know what Joab did to me, and describes some of the things that he did. He said, therefore act according to your wisdom, but do not let his head go down to the grave in peace. He's basically saying, my life's over, you kill him. That's what David said. I'm not justifying this, I'm just relaying what he did. He had an understanding that if God was going to bless him, it would be in this life. And he preserved him for the length of his life, and then dealt with him. Similarly, we see in the life of Shimei, down here in verse 8, there is also with you Shimei. And he had said to him, this last phrase of this verse, it says, he had told him, I will not put you to death with the sword. But David tells his son, while he's going away and he's going to die, David is, now therefore do not hold him guiltless, for you are a wise man. You know what you ought to do to him. You will know what you ought to do to him, and you shall bring his head down with blood to the grave, or to Sheol. David's saying, my life is over. when you're fully king and installed, make sure you take care of Joab, make sure you take care of Shimei. In my understanding of these verses, he is understanding and responding to this basic truth, right or wrong. This is just it's what he's doing. Whether it was a completely righteous decision or not, the Lord knows. But most happy are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. They shall inherit the things of the earth. David was going to the grave himself. He could no longer inherit the things of the earth. In his mind, apparently, there was no longer a need for meekness, because he would not inherit any more things of the earth in his life by acting in meekness. And so he tells his son, make sure you take care of these people when I'm gone, because my own meekness doesn't help me anymore. Again, whether this is a righteous decision or not, is not for right now. But he understood that in order to inherit the earth, the things would be of this life, of this world. And so it is with all of these Beatitudes. When we look at all of these Beatitudes, these are all the conditions in which man finds himself. Men find themselves in poverty of spirit. Men find themselves mourning. Men find themselves when they're meek, in verse 5 here. But when one realizes, if one is simply not exerting themselves and not trying to get their own way, it can become discouraging. Discouragement, doubt, upsetness can come. But the moment you understand that the meek, who don't try and get their own way, it might not happen immediately, but they shall inherit what everyone else is fighting for. It shall be given to them. As soon as you realize that, something happens. You all of a sudden become most happy, not when it comes. You become most happy right in your meekness. You can fight, you can exercise your own ability, and you can get the things that you think that you want in this life that everyone else is fighting for. Chances are, a lot of people who do anyway, violate their own conscience in so many ways. They have to step on so many other people to get what they want. And when they finally obtain the things of the earth, if God gives them space to enjoy them, they've already, at the expense of other people, at the expense of relationships, at the expense of everything else, they've already violated their own heart. But the meek, who don't fight for it, who simply receive the things of the earth, because God said they would, they're most happy right in the moment of their meekness, because they know that, as it says in Proverbs, better is one handful with peace than two handfuls with striving. And so they know, if I don't fight for it, God will give it to me. And I don't have to violate my own conscience. I don't have to violate my own heart. And what everyone else is going after, God will simply give it to me. For Hannah, the greatest desire of her heart was just to have a child. And she, in her meekness, who didn't open up her mouth and speak, inherited a son whose words never fell to the ground. Likewise, David likely had his throne preserved, had Israel preserved, at least in an easier way, possibly through Mordecai in the life of Esther. When we don't fight to get our way, when we don't assert ourselves to get what we want, God makes sure that we get what we really want when we need it, so that it's a good thing. He gives the meek, he sees that they inherit the earth. When we don't fight to get our way, right in that moment, right when it seems like everyone else is getting something, long before it actually arrives sometimes, most happy are the meek, not simply because they're meek. Granted, that's a wonderful thing in itself, but right when they're meek, they know that they shall inherit the earth. When that happens, the attitude changes. The face is brightened. We no longer are worried, and we're no longer subject to discouragement. Right then, well before it gets there, right then we are most happy. And the reason is part number 3 right here. because, and then the reason, they shall inherit the earth. Thank you very much.